Good morning. So this morning I'm going to return to an old friend, the Anapana Sati Sutta. But I'm going to return to it in a place that's not so easy to describe in a way that's clear. In the Anapana Sati Sutta, there is a section with 16 pairs of lines, starting off with just simply training yourself to breathe in and training yourself to breathe out, and moving through the experience of knowing the body, the experience of knowing feelings that arise, the experience of knowing the mind state that's present. And then you get down to the 13th line, and it says, you train yourself. I will breathe in, focusing on inconstancy. You train yourself. I will breathe out, focusing on inconstancy. Inconstancy, impermanence, things changing, affects us constantly, powerfully, and drives our emotions, it drives our thoughts, it drives our lives, our relationships. It's very profound, the nature of inconstancy. And I've been working with it a lot. There was an incident that occurred last November. And the incident occurred when I was in Mexico for my nephew's wedding. And we actually spent a week in Mexico before we went to the wedding itself. We spent the time in Mexico City and had a lovely time. And then my nephew had arranged a van for the wedding party. My sisters and, the family and the person who was officiating the wedding and a few other people. And of course, the bride and groom. And we took this van from Mexico City. It was supposed to be a 3.5 hour drive, I think. Well, maybe less than that. It's hard to remember. It took 5 hours. It took 5 hours because we were taken into custody by the National Police for 3 hours. And if there is a vivid example of inconstancy, it's being in a very lovely mood and a warm place and chatting away as we're driving, the trip from Mexico City to where the wedding venue was. And, we get pulled over by the police. And, for us in the back of the van, it's not a significant thing. I mean, the police wanted to check the registration and the license of the driver and the registration of the van. 10 minutes later, we're back on the road. 10 minutes after that, we're not back on the road. We get pulled over again. The police suspect there's some fraud going on in the registration of the van. The change, the shift from being a wedding party, you know, with plenty of time to get to the wedding venue on time, to being the wedding party clearly going to be late for the actual, well, this was not the wedding itself, but it was the sort of the welcome party. No access to a bathroom, right? Shows you how privileged we are. Yeah, that was our big concern. It was really not that big a deal in some ways. But there was a break in the continuity that really caught me in a very profound and deep way. And I guess because I have a practice, I didn't try to have an answer to what it was about right away. I just, set it as something that I would reflect on over time and see what came up. So over the, I guess, 6 months since that happened, I have been watching for similar breaks in the continuity and the flow of whatever was going on. And I have begun to really see in a way that much deeper than I've ever seen it before, how inconstant our lives are. How aspects of our lives, of our personality, of our skills, of our ways of being in the world, aspects of our relationships and our everything, that we have sort of a sense of settled, aren't really settled. There are moments when things fall apart, to quote Pema Chodron's title. There are moments when what we think we are isn't what's occurring. What we think a relationship is about is suddenly different. Things change. One of the teachings, maybe one of the deepest teachings of the Buddha, is that it's this very inconstancy that causes the stress and anxiety, the suffering, the dukkha that we experience. Because nothing can be depended upon to stay constant. There are moments when something we depend on becomes undependable for a period of time. And then we attempt and often succeed at, regulating, coming back to, returning to some type of sense of right, this is who I am, this is what this is how we connect. We strive to come back to. But the truth is, and we know this, you never actually return. You're always moving forward. There's always changes, and you've adapted to the changes. And very much the question is, how much of a pretzel are you willing to twist yourself into in order to return to the illusion that something is dependable when we know that now it is not, at least not all the time? How do we hold these abrupt moments, these moments of shakiness, these moments of feeling like, that nothing can be depended upon to remain steady and constant, because by its nature, everything is inconstant. So the very next line in the Anapana Sati is the Buddha's answer to what to do. And the Buddha says, you train yourself. I will breathe in, focusing on dispassion. You train yourself. I will breathe out, focusing on dispassion. Well, in our culture, dispassion is not a positive term. It's sort of a term that we associate with, losing focus, losing energy, losing the ability to make stuff happen in the way we want to, passionate. We want, we say somebody is passionate about something, we're describing it as a positive. And perhaps it is a positive in some ways. But what the Buddha is referring to is in relationship to this focus on inconstancy, to the awareness that things are inconstant. And so that when there's a moment when things don't go the way you expect, when you don't seem to be the person you expect to be, when a relationship doesn't seem to be the way that you depend on that relationship to be, when things aren't working, is the moment that the Buddha is saying, focus on dispassion. Focus on the truth of inconstancy. When something breaks, I'm pausing because I'm thinking, this is a sort of aside, but here we go. Pretty much the only time I curse in my life at these days is at screens, at my phone, at the computer. There is something about having to constantly adapt to the way that they are telling me I have to act in order to get what I want done. Just arouses passion. And I'm suddenly realizing, I just discovered something I have to add to my practice. It was just dispassion in the face of my computer doing something I don't want it to do. But that's it. That's what it is. is we're moving through our lives all the time, re-regulating ourselves to come back to a sense of stability, a sense of knowing this is who I am, this is what I am, this is what this relationship is about, this is what, the work issue is, this is what we, we constantly are trying to stabilize our understanding of everything that affects us. And to some degree that works out, to even a pretty good degree. But there are always moments of where the constancy breaks, where there's a moment where it's not working. It's not the way I thought it was, at least in this moment. And at least in my experience, when that happens, I experience an awful lot of upset, which, right, the apple cart has been upset, turned upside down, going for a spin. And I get aroused, emotionally aroused, mentally aroused, physically aroused. This is the passion that the Buddha is talking about. In order to let go of that passionate response to something breaking in the rhythm of, constancy, we have to first recognize this is the nature of things. As much as we strive to create steadiness and normalcy, and this is what it is, this is who I am, as much as we strive to steady that and hold it in place, we can't. We don't. Inconstancy is the nature of the reality we live in. And the Buddha is saying, remember this in a moment when things break. Remember that what you were depending on to remain steady was never steady. Was never steady. And yes, you're going to make the effort to go back to creating steadiness. And the first step is dispassion, is to notice the arising of, strong feelings, really, significant body reaction, and a mind state that, collapses and narrows down to the upset of this break in the continuity that you were trying to maintain. And the Buddha says, arouse dispassion, soften the reaction, calm the reaction, release the flood that comes in when things aren't the way that you were, moving through your day, and boom, there's a break in the smoothness. Inconstancy. You are so vivid in this moment, you might say. I suggest you come up with your own phrase. You could say, oh, hello, reality. Inconstancy is the nature of the reality we live in. Everything that makes up this universe that we live in changes, constantly changing, flowing, moving, interacting, forming connections, and then the connections separate. And suddenly something new is present. Calming the energy of passion, disconnecting the sense of self, the self-identity, who I am, what this is, disconnecting that from the passion and resting in the truth of impermanence. This is our task. This is our practice, to do this very thing. To steady ourselves, seeing clearly what is currently occurring, how what is currently occurring is not at all what you had intended. How it makes your whole sense of self incredibly shaky. How it creates a desire to somehow pull everything back together so it's the way that is familiar, the way that you have figured out how to navigate. There was no expectation I would be spending 3 hours locked in a van, well, locked, you know, sitting in a van on the side of the road in Mexico. Helpless, unable to have any impact at all because it wasn't about us. It was about the owner of the van, the driver of the van, and the police. It was not about us. And passion arose, right? Imagine a group of a dozen people in that van. Imagine what they would say to each other, how they would feel, you know, all the different stories that arose about what we should do or what's going on. All the times in the 6 months since then, I have noticed that I'm not doing what I thought I would be doing. I'm not feeling what I thought I would be feeling. The mind state I'm experiencing is not the mind state I expected. I'm upset. I'm upset because things aren't going the way I intended them to go. So here it is. First, focus on inconstancy. And then focus on dispassion. Focus on, this is normal, you know. Everything is inconstant. just because I've figured out how to navigate this day, this week, this month, this year, this time of life, doesn't change the universe so that everything is now aligned to meet me where I want to be. The universe instead flows in its own manner, everything changing and moving and shifting, being just what it is. The more I cling to an identity, to a sense of self, to an established pattern, to the idea of this is who I am, this is what I am, the more I cling, the more painful it is when inconstancy arises, as it naturally does, and my identity shatters. The scramble to pick up the pieces and weave them back together again, to become me again, to become, to become something, rather than simply being of a nature that is inconstant. And that striving to become something arouses so much passion, so much emotion, so much sense of struggle and pain. What if I let that go? What if I acknowledge inconstancy? What if I bow to the nature of what is? And instead of trying to return to what I intended, to what I thought, to who I was expecting, what if I let that go and said, this is how it is now. What should I do? Dispassion, a freedom from powerful arousal to a quieter place. A place where there is some joy in the very nature of what is. Joy that's not dependent on things going my way, being the way I want them to be. But a joy at the very inconstancy, the very nature of movement and flow. We would not exist without inconstancy. I have not been, present since the beginning. In fact, I haven't been present as me except for this very moment. There's always new. A steady awareness of inconstancy, of change, a steady awareness of the impermanent nature that we are. Calm, at ease. This is what we work for in our practice. Calm and ease. So let's try this morning. Breathing in, focusing on inconstancy. Breathing out, focusing on inconstancy. Breathing in, focusing on dispassion, on ease. Breathing out, focusing on dispassion, on ease, on resting in the nature of what is.